Time is speeding up. Chaos is shifting into a new level, and we feel the pull to unlock the mysteries of the universe. Timeless spiritual wisdom offers the point of stability to navigate these times and to open our greatest potential. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the fun and knowledge of visionary best-selling authors Shri and Kira as they explore these mysteries and invite your higher love to come forward. And now, here are Shri and Kira.
Hello everyone, welcome to Higher Love Radio.
Namaste, beloved ones, and welcome. You know, this is an extraordinary moment, and our show today really focuses on this creative consciousness and the creative decay, or the consciousness decay. What are you connected to? Powerful stuff, really, in powerful times.
Absolutely. You know, every once in a while as we scroll through the internet, we're looking at the different news bites and what's going on in the outer world. We're stunned, absolutely stunned by some of the events that are bubbling forward. And you may ask, now, why would you be stunned? It's only because they seem so antithetical to human nature. The things that are going on, at least in the news, seem to be very contrary to the essence of who we are.
You know, do you ever feel that way, right? You look at it and say, how could this possibly be? Just to give you a snapshot as to where we are right now when we're capsulizing this show, regardless of when you're listening to it, it could be right now when this is topical, or 20 years from now, this will still make sense. We are in the midst of an Egyptian challenge, let's just put it that way, going on in the country of Egypt. Bradley Manning has just been sentenced to 35 years for his WikiLeaks participation.
Yeah.
We have the spouses of journalists being detained in airports simply because they're the spouse of a journalist. We have 3 teenagers in Oklahoma who are murdering people because they were bored. Now, from the outside, that's really quite a bit to make you say, where is the consciousness? What is happening to our world? And you know, we're just at the tip of the iceberg with all this. We have Russia with the anti-gay laws. We have so many other things that are percolating. We have UN inspection teams in Syria where they claim 1,300 people have just been killed by chemical weapons. There is so much happening that it can become overwhelming.
You know, it is overwhelming to me. If I try to encapsulate all of this, it's really a challenge. There are layers that make some sense. We've seen patterns in history that are similar to this, and we'll touch on that a little bit, because you know, what purpose is it to pick up a newspaper or look at the internet of what's going on if it doesn't offer some context, some sense of meaning about our world at large? And let's stop there for a second. A sense of meaning about our world at large, meaning our shared world.
Exactly, and I just have to jump in because one of the things, Shri, that when you talked about meaning or a sense of context is that what I've been noticing lately is how much, and maybe you've noticed this too, that because we're living in a world of headline news, that people are getting 10-word or less, 10-word explanations. Stories have nothing to do with the headline. Headlines are marketing tools, and we're all being, you know, bombarded with these falsehoods, and the truth is layered, and it does ask, how does this overlay with consciousness? You know, is the truth of consciousness layered? We're living at this moment of this culminating Kali Yuga energy, this kind of like misinterpretation or falsehood perpetuation.
Yeah, so let's just deal with that for the moment. Headline news. I thought, you know, when Twitter came out, I thought that was absurd, 144 characters or whatever it is. But then, as we think about it, headline news is less than that. There are people who simply gather their opinions based upon the headlines, because in the headlines there's a piece of information and a little bit of the reaction, you know, of what you ought to think about.
Well, they're marketing tools.
They're
indeed
tools. Pings to consciousness to help start creating programmed reactivity. Programmed reactivity.
That's a powerful thing. Think about that. Programmed reactivity.
And so if you allow yourself to be a victim of the superficial, then you will surf the wave of the manipulated sea.
Ooh, I love that. If you are a victim of the superficial, you will surf the wave of the manipulated sea.
You know, there's tons of people on YouTube and elsewhere that have their conspiracy theories, that have their right-wing or left-wing agendas, etc. And bits and pieces of what these people share is certainly true.
Absolutely.
There are nuggets of truth in every perspective. However, what's true for you? That's really where we want to go today. So at first, let's just take a look at this swirling mass of disturbing information and ask ourselves, why are we disturbed? Mm-hmm. And if you're not disturbed, that's a question.
Well, and yet at the same time, Shri, I want to really underscore what you're sharing here, which is if you are having a reaction, right? We were talking about that earlier, this programmed reactivity. Bear in mind that when we are reactive, that is actually the most unhappy place to be. There isn't anyone on the planet who is less happy than the constant reactor, because it means that 100% of your data, 100% of your emotional status, 100% of how you gauge your day or flow through your day is based upon external stimuli. And the external stimuli right now is saying, connect with me. You know, we've talked about this a lot before, and we refer to it as the planetary thought body.
Yes.
The planetary thought body right now is the headlines. It's the 144 character Twitter feeds. It's the blogs. You know,
a lot of emotional energy,
That's
thoughts
right.
that are filled with emotion.
You know, it's funny because the other day I did something I don't normally do, but I was very engrossed in the story in Egypt, having recently been there and feeling great empathy for all of the people of that country right now and seeing them as a microcosm of what's coming forward on our country. I was reading a blog that came after a story, and I only had to read about 5 or 6 to realize that it was a dumping ground. It had, by the time I got to 5 or 6, it was off. It had nothing to do with the story, and it was the bloggers looking for a way to argue with each other, to call each other names, to use this veil or this perceived veil of anonymity to connect with the turbulence, to connect with the chaos.
And to throw epitaphs or pithy remarks that are so prejudicial and judgmental, you know, that I'm not sure where the payoff is in trying to simply aggravate another being.
Well, it's the reactor. See, it's that constant reactor. And with the advent of blog sites and the advent of commentary, you can become supported in your reactivity. And if you're supported in your reactivity, then you're feeding the planetary thought body, and you're attached to the planetary thought body, which means you have, at your greatest essence, allowed the reactivity to become your emotional field.
It becomes your norm.
Exactly.
We're seeking that energetic high, that connection to an inflammatory reality, all the while thinking we're seeking something else.
Resolution.
Resolution, order, peace, trying to bring a higher sense of how it ought to be, my way or the highway, basically.
Which is really, I mean, and I'm not encouraging you to go engage in this, and maybe some of you already are engaged. What I am inviting you to do is to pay attention to how it affects you. Look at the adrenaline. You know, we are adrenaline junkies on this planet. More and more, that is becoming a challenge for people. And certainly these pithy, as you say, interchanges feed the adrenaline.
And so, okay, all of that's known. And if anybody thinks a little bit, if just pause and think, you can see that these types of news bites, these types of blog sites are not constructively supporting the greater harmony. Now, this could be argued. There will be those that say, well, you know, we have to have the battle. We have to have the controversy in order to shake out the positions. And all I would say is that thoughtful, meaningful interaction, thoughtful dialogue is very useful. Name calling, raising voices, trying to encapsulate things into small sound bites glosses over and misses the nuances. So, for example, when we have two groups of people in Egypt, one of them has a committed religious belief around the women wearing veils, around fundamental scripture, and that scripture that they have placed their heart and soul, their commitment in, dictates a certain kind of political reality. The other group is what would be considered more liberal, more open, that say, yes, we have faith in the very same God. However, we believe that there is a permission to express, to evolve, that what was written for one era doesn't apply to another era. Yet the gospel of love, the gospel of reverence, devotion, and respect do apply. And so thus a different political structure would evolve from that line of thinking. Now, I'm oversimplifying a little bit. However, the point I want to make is that, do we yell at each other? Do we bomb each other's cars? Do we attack each other? How does that resolve anything?
Well, Shri, this is what we're seeing happening with the blogging. This is what we're seeing happening literally or physically. This is what we're seeing in this world of reactivity. In this world of reactivity, we forget our creativity. When we are the constant reactor, we forget our creative nature. We forget that we are the co-creator. We forget that we have the opportunity to shift, and instead we react, and thereby we dive into the stream of the collective consciousness, which the collective consciousness right now is manipulated. The collective consciousness right now is swimming in a pool of fear, of headlines, of characters, of perceptions that are really very, very powerful and supported. The structures, if you want to talk about it, around them say, please jump in. We'll make the water warm. We'll make it comfy. We'll give you a life preserver. Please jump in. And this is what we're going to talk about in the second half of the show. What are you connected to? The creative consciousness or the planetary consciousness? And
so each and every one of these situations around our globe, whether you plug in, if your heart and mind are interested in plugging into the situation in Egypt, there's a lesson to be learned there. A seemingly irreconcilable conflict must have a reconciliation, or the conflict wouldn't exist. Everything is built of the same unity. It's as if you have this flat thing and it becomes a glove, and now you have independent fingers that look like I'm separated, yet they're part of the same hand. And so it is in Egypt. How can we, as a culture of humans, learn to find our unity and thus celebrate our diversity? Those are powerful questions, and these questions demand an evolution in consciousness.
And this is where we're going in the second half of the show. So take a breath, bring a hand to your heart, smile. We're so glad you're here, and we'll be right back.
Namaste, beloved one. This is Kira Ra, and I am inviting you to take a journey of the soul in the land of the heart. Imagine your life free from chaos and filled with creative clarity. Imagine waking up each day in your private lakefront casita, greeted by brilliant sun, flowers, and birds. It is here that you will effortlessly resurrect your divine blueprint in pristine energy. Yes, I am inviting you to join us for a personal resurrection.
Welcome back. We're glad you're with us. Today we're kind of bouncing around with an intention. We're bouncing on the fact that out in the outer world, our world is giving us evidence of systems in decay, people in crisis, and a world that is seeking to find its soul once again. That's the kind of impression we have when we look at the news and the headlines and the blogs. And yet we know in our hearts there's more to the story.
Yes, we do. And in the first half of the show, we were making the case about the planetary thought body and living in a world of reactivity, where reactivity is reinforced, where reactivity is encouraged, where reactivity has become normal. And what we'd like to do in the second half of the show is perhaps explore how this is actually, I like to define it as the two trains coming toward each other, but finding a way where they can kind of reach the point without killing each other. And that is, how does consciousness factor into our reactivity? You know, are they at the opposite ends, or can they come together and unify and help us come forward? There is a greater purpose for what's happening right now. However, I think more than ever, it's becoming more and more difficult to remain above water, so to speak, to remain in the essence of, okay, I know there's a greater purpose. How do I navigate it? How do I find it? How do I bring it into my life?
So in a time of building, you know, if we look at a time of building, meaning there is a creative force at work, and there seems to be a continual improvement in abundance, in focus, in joy, in a sense of meaning. That's a time of building. And in many countries post-World War II, there was a building. Even in the countries that had extreme devastation as a result of the war, those decades, those first couple of decades especially, following the end of World War II, were a time of reconstruction. And certainly in the United States, where we grew up, the era of the late 40s into the 50s and 60s was a huge productive upswing, that the manufacturing base that had been created as a result of the war effort, and that what was needed for the war was turned into civilian opulence, really. You know, remember the great machines that would vend the sandwiches, and the new cars that came out, and the technologies, and the suburbs, and the tract houses, and the improvements in airline travel, etc. We were in a time of building, and the future seemed optimistic in all ways. That's the same as in the stock market when they call that they have a bull market. It's as if whatever you bet on will get bigger, will pay off. And so when you're in a time of building, we add our energy to that which we see as the trend. So there's a trend, we lend our energy to it. We're actually magnifying the abundance by lending our energy to it. And everybody who's playing that game, even if they're a little hypnotized, is getting some sort of positive payoff. They say,
Yes.
This works. We can put our arms around each other and say, we're on the same team.
Even if that perception leads to a sense of insecurity, even if it makes you more fearful or more concerned, you're unified in that, you're being supported in that. And this is what's important to pay attention to, because when we wake up, when our eyes open, when that veil comes off, we recognize, hey, what's going on is forcing me to either wake up or to just stay in the panacea, so to speak.
And so the outer world teaches us things about ourselves if we'll pause and actually reflect. If we simply give our consciousness away to the outer world, we become a player in the hypnotic game.
We become a pawn is what we become.
Yeah, in reality you're a pawn. So now let's move forward to what seems to be happening in the current years. We're in a time where the great economies of our planet are all in debt.
Now consider that.
You know,
All of them. No one is immune from this, because we are a global community. Regardless of what your personal experience is, we live on this one small teeny planet, and we are all interconnected. And that transcends religion or dogma, just we are connected. If you can just play with us for that one for a moment.
Yeah, so the richest countries in the world, I'm using countries a little bit loosely because it includes Europe, the European Union, the United States, Japan, Great Britain, all of these countries are in debt, which means they've spent their future in order to get something in the present time. They're in debt because there's 4 people in the world that control 70% of the money supply.
Now wait a minute. For me, that's always like a just stop. But the reality is, even though they have people behind them, it comes down to these 4 people.
And so these people control how much money is printed, how to loan money. And when I say these countries are in debt, what I mean is they have to borrow money to pay the interest on that which they borrowed before.
Imagine if you could live your personal life that way.
You're borrowing money just to pay the interest, never paying back the principal. Well, you know that at some point the reckoning will hit. if we can borrow enough money to pay our credit card interest, we can stay afloat until the day comes when no one wants to loan you that money, till the day comes when confidence truly hits bottom. Now, this is not an economic show.
At
This
all.
what I want to point out is that the symptoms of what we'll call the bear market or the decline are working at every level. So at the monetary level, the richest countries are at the end of their career of dominance. Other countries are coming forward. At the other thing that's going on socially, think of the great population that this includes: the United States, North America, the UK, and European Union. Unemployment's never been higher. The youth of these countries see no future. There is no positive up movement, meaning the bull market, for them to latch into. So what happens to their consciousness, their energy, their enthusiasm? They're afraid. There's no sense of positive hope. And what can happen is either that will stimulate a creative solution for someone who takes the time to look deeply, or it's going to stimulate the reactivity, to get out and march, to throw rocks through windows, to express their discontent without a constructive solution. These are the kind of things that are happening in the Middle East as well. So the piece that I want to bring forward for all of us to consider today is, okay, it's happening. We're in this deconstruction phase.
We're in this reactive planetary thought body bubble.
And the cycle, we've seen a building phase post-World War II, and for various reasons we're now in a different place on the curve. And collectively, we're sharing in a world that is having to reorganize itself. So if you have attached your sense of well-being to things in the outer world, you're going to get shook up. That's one of the spiritual benefits of what's going on right now.
And it is a benefit. Hear that as a benefit.
Because in the world of spirituality, what is essential, what is true, is to align one's consciousness with the essence of who you are, with the essence of the divine, and how the divine flows through you.
And so if we look at that graph again, as reactivity is rising, so is consciousness. They're rising together, but they're coming toward each other. So the key is, what happens in your life when the two collide? How do you reconcile the consciousness with the reactivity? And then, how will the planet reconcile consciousness with reactivity? Because this collision is coming. The key is knowing it's coming, preparing for it, and allowing it to be a glorious moment rather than a polarizing moment. You know, going back to what we talked about in the first half of the show, when Sri and I were in Egypt, we met some extraordinary people and spent a lot of time talking to many, many people and just sitting down and having wonderful mint tea, which I'll never forget, and lots of other things with them. And I remember this one woman looked at us and she was so sad and at the same time so clear, and she said, what will happen in our country is that this will eventually come down to veil versus no veil. She said it will have nothing to do with the outside, it will have nothing to do with who's in charge, it will be all about veil versus no veil. And she was really very, very sad about that. And the reason I'm sharing that is, when we hit that collision, and that collision has happened in Egypt right now, they're basically at that moment, it's how we harness our consciousness that allows us the ability to step through to the next level. This is why it is absolutely essential that you make a decision. Am I the constant reactor, or am I proactive? How do I witness this rise in consciousness as it is being beautifully, beautifully contrasted with this planetary thought body? How do these two come together in my life? When we allow ourselves to unify, when we allow our life to be the presence, then we are removed from the reactivity and become the witness. We become the benevolent presence. We become the one who is available for the next one that chooses to unify through the collision rather than polarize from the collision. A very important point.
it's essential that we all fill our spiritual bank accounts. We're in a time where the outer world is not going to feed you. It's not going to nourish your soul because the outer world has disconnected. Now, I'm not talking about nature. I'm talking about the world of man's creations, the political structures, the educational structure, the social structure, the traffic system. Every aspect is now going to feel more abrasive, less nourishing, less supportive, because they're in decline. They need to be reorganized. And so the piece that I want to encourage you to remember is when one has a sense of buoyancy inside, when you are essentially filled up with spirit, the rest of this stuff, and it's just stuff, will not be as devastating or as impactful. You'll be able to look at it and go, where can I help? Is my energy needed? Is this mine to even interact with?
And you know, I hear a lot of you saying, okay, how? And we only have a couple minutes left in the show today, and here's a couple of quick things that you can do. Number one, wake up in the morning and choose to be the witness. Disconnect from that which is feeding this system. And when you find that you want to tap in as the witness. Another thing you can do is visit our website, shrieandkira.com. Go to the Archangelic Messages, learn some of the practices, download our free ebook on self-ascension. Give yourself a gift every day. Subscribe to our free newsletter that has daily meditations, weekly practices, all free. Something to allow you to get a little closer to your co-creative self, your co-creative nature. Talk with people who uplift you rather than incite you. Use that adrenaline addiction to be addicted to your own co-creative nature rather than addicted to the planetary thought body. These are easy, pro-productive steps that you can take right now, today.
You know, in the times past, at the times the Master Jesus walked on the planet, there was a group of beings called the Essene. And actually the Essene were present before the birth of Christ. One of the things we know about them is they lived in communities. They basically collected themselves with others who could reflect back the love, the reverence, and the healthy nourishment of having that focus on the divine. That they could not find that nourishment in society. So they formed their own societies. They necessarily had their own communities. However, they did not disconnect. They would walk among. They would offer their services of healing. They would offer their wisdom. They would offer their energy where Spirit guided them to offer it. And then as they began to feel depleted, they would come back to their community for rest and nourishment and recharge. And this is how they operated for centuries. You know, the outer world will not feed you. Your spirit, your sense of the divine, your sense of emotional comfort in your own spiritual nature must be nourished. And we live in a world where you can do that through the internet. You can do that through certain types of chat rooms, certain types of communities that are available online. And this is why Kira mentions shrieandkira.com, that we offer certain things that will nourish you, and you don't have to leave your home to do it.
How fun is that? And so, beloved one, we invite you to consider in this moment, regardless of when you're tuning in to this program, what are you connected to? Are you connected to your co-creative consciousness, or are you connected to a planetary thought body of fear and anger? Take a moment and breathe. Feel the gift of that knowing. Take action today, and may you know that it's all in divine order and it will resolve. The question is how, and you get to answer that. With many blessings of love, namaste.
Namaste. Emotional comfort in your own spiritual nature must be nourished. And we live in a world where you can do that through the internet. You can do that through certain types of chat rooms, certain types of communities that are available online. And this is why Kira mentions shrieandkira.com, that we offer certain things that will nourish you, and you don't have to leave your home to do it.
How fun is that? And so, beloved one, we invite you to consider in this moment, regardless of when you're tuning in to this program, what are you connected to? Are you connected to your co-creative consciousness, or are you connected to a planetary thought body of fear and anger? Take a moment and breathe. Feel the gift of that knowing. Take action today, and may you know that it's all in divine order and it will resolve. The question is how, and you get to answer that. With many blessings of love, namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you for joining us today for 2012 Higher Love. Remember that you can find out more about Sri and Kira by going to sriandkira.com. That's SRIANDKIRA.